Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all very much for joining us. My name is Michael Newman. I'm the Chief Executive of the AJR, the Association of Jewish Refugees, and it's my really great pleasure to welcome everybody to this event this afternoon. It's something that we're very excited to be able to bring to you, and we've been overwhelmed by the numbers of people who are interested. This is by far the largest event that we have done in Zoom. So you're all very welcome. And I suspect that for some of you, this will be your first interaction with the AJR. We're particularly delighted to welcome you and also to give you a flavor of the work of the organization. For those of you who are members, you will know that we are a social welfare agency representing and supporting Holocaust refugees and survivors in Britain. But we also provide activities and services for the second and even the third generation, and increasingly members of the subsequent generations are enrolling as members. And if that's something that we hope will appeal to you, then please do make contact with us. And also, if you know of anybody who could benefit from any of our primary services, particularly the social welfare services, at this critical time when people are perhaps feeling greater need. Just before I hand over to colleagues who are going to run the event today, just a couple of housekeeping announcements. As you can see, all the guests are on mute. You will be kept on mute throughout the course of the event, and that's to save on the background noise. There won't be the opportunity to ask questions because of the chat function. We usually have that open, but the event is being recorded and will be on our YouTube channel immediately after the event. We also recommend that you use the speaker view option, because that's the best way to see the people speaking on the screens. And if you should become unmuted, then please do mute yourself. Keep yourself muted throughout the event. As well as colleagues who have organized the event today, I also want to thank colleagues at other organizations, particularly World Jewish Relief and the Wiener Holocaust Library, for helping us with some of the logistics in pulling information about the event together. So I hope you all very much enjoy the event. We're looking forward to a fascinating afternoon. And with that, I would like to hand over to Sir Erich Reich, the chairman of the AJR Kinder Transport Committee. Sir Erich, over to you.
Thank you, Michael. It's wonderful to talk to so many people. It's really a great pleasure. However, I know that you all, or most of you, receive unexpected telephone calls during this unusual time, either from your family or from close friends. And I received one very unusual from Sir David Attenborough. Well, that told me this is going to be a very special call. Sir David, I would like to thank you for responding to my letter and for agreeing to come to this particular event and talk about all your involvement or your family's involvement with the Kinder Transport. It was terrific. We are all very thrilled to have you with us today. As it happens, this week is the anniversary of the first group coming, the Kinder Transport group coming to the UK. They left Berlin on the 1st of December 1938 and arrived the following day in Liverpool Street Station, where if you ever go there, you will see a statue for the Kinder Transport made by somebody from the Kinder Transport, Frank Meisler. What is so fascinating that since the first group, during 9 months, nearly 10,000 children, unaccompanied, came to this country. It is a project that has never, ever been surpassed. I also would like to use this opportunity to welcome Dame Esther Ransom. We have met before, but she may not remember me. It doesn't really matter. I'm delighted because she's always had a special attitude towards the Kindertransport. And she will be, and she has agreed, for which I thank her, to converse with all the participants, including my friend, Lord Alf Dubs. Over to you, my dear.
Thank you so much, Erich. Well, of course, it's my pleasure and privilege to take part in this afternoon. And it's a great pleasure for me to be interviewing Sir David Attenborough. Now, I'm not entirely sure if you can actually hear me because I'm in the middle of a forest and my internet is appalling. So, David, I can't actually see you at this moment, but can you hear me?
Very clearly.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, David, this is it must be a very frustrating time for you because I'm sure there are about 8 continents you should be on at this moment, but we're very pleased you're with us. And it's going to be an occasion. I'm used to be talking about the children when we discuss Kindertransport, but on this particular occasion, I think we're going to be celebrating 2 sets of parents. We're going to be celebrating the parents who, with huge courage, decided to allow their children to go into the homes of complete strangers, and to celebrate the parents who opened their homes to these children whom they can't have known and who they must have known very little about. And among those parents, David, were your parents. So I wonder what kind of people they were. Describe them to us.
Well, my father was the head of a little university college in Leicester. He was an Anglo-Saxon scholar by education, but he believed very strongly in provincial universities. And Leicester University was supported by local subscription. The citizens of Leicester simply paid for it themselves. And when he went there and he got there, there were, I think, less than 100 undergraduates. He was the second principal of the but he gradually started to build it up. My mother, who was the daughter of a headmaster close to Derby, was a bit younger than him, and a linguist. She spoke very good Italian and French. And she was very active socially. She had organized relief for Basque children from the bombing of Guernica, and Basque children came to this country and she looked after a group of them. My father was the chairman of a group that was concerned with German Jewish academics, and did what he could to bring people out by offering them jobs. I mean, distinguished professors of physics or chemistry or whatever would be offered the job as a lab assistant, as you had to do in order to get that person to come. The British government insisted on that. And then when nearly always, all these people were on their way to relations in America. And while so that there were a number of distinguished scientists who came through University College Leicester with menial jobs for a month or so before moving on. And it was in the course of that he was asked whether, by the chief medical officer of Berlin, whether we could give a host to his 2 daughters who were 13 and 11, who were on their way to their uncle in New York. And the idea was that they would be with us for maybe a couple of weeks, 3 weeks, and then they would get on a ship and go off to America, which of course he said yes to. In the event, of course, what actually happened was that the children arrived on the Kinder transport, the last Kinder transport, and 13 days later, no, 17 days later, I think, war broke out. And so my parents said, well, boys, I have two brothers, Richard, an actor you knew, and a younger brother, John, who died a few years ago. And she said, my parents, her mother said, well, here are the girls, they're going to be your sisters until the war is over.
How did you take to that, you and your brothers?
In a fairly matter-of-fact way, I think. I mean, and actually, having talked to Helga and Irene, their names were, they were 13 and 11, Irena and Helga Maria. They too were very matter-of-fact about the whole business. I mean, Helga was quite bouncy about it all. It was a big adventure. I think she's too young to realize the significance of what was happening to her. Irene was much more aware of things and was more profoundly upset by what was happening.
Did they speak English?
Not at all, and we didn't speak German either. But it was extraordinary how quickly they discovered it. I mean, my parents came down. I remember very well when war broke out, and I remember my father. It's moving for me to think about it now, but my dear father and my mother standing by the radio and listening to Chamberlain, to the Prime Minister, saying, "And now we are at war with Germany." And my mother turned to the three of us, because I have a younger brother, and the two Bayachs, and said, "Well, now we are one family. And Irene and Helga will be your sisters now until such time as the war is over."
Extraordinary generosity of spirit.
Well, looking at it now and looking at it from an adult's point of view, I agree. I mean, and the experience, of course, I mean, people say nice things. Jewish people say nice things to me about our hospitality, but of course it was nothing to do with us. I mean, it was my parents, and they said that, and they said, "We are now one family. You now have two sisters, and they will be with us until it's over."
You have reunited with them fairly recently.
I mean, they really were our sisters, as it were, and until they left. And they left 17 days after they arrived, the war started, and they left, I think, 2 years after, so that they were through very sensitive time. I mean, Helga was 11 and was 17 when she left, and Irene was 20 when she left.
They must have very clear memories of your family.
Yes, they both of them married. Irene married actually a research scientist who worked on the atom bomb, in fact. Helga also married a psychiatrist. Irene died quite young, but we kept her. And I used to, whenever I went to New York, I would go and see them. And then Irene died, but Helga, Irene didn't have children, but Helga had several, and we kept in touch with them, and are still in touch with them. And they come over here and visit us, and it's a great pleasure to see them.
But of course, their parents died. Their father, I think, died in Auschwitz, was it?
He was murdered in Auschwitz, yes.
Yes.
Their mother had died earlier.
I preferred it the other way.
Okay. But
Yes.
her father was looking after them, but
Yes.
he was killed in Auschwitz, yes.
How much did that tragedy impinge on you and your brothers? How aware were you of the desperate danger?
The British people didn't know about Auschwitz. They didn't know about concentration camps at all until the British Army or the Allies overran Eastern Germany and Austria, and these dreadful revelations, difficult to speak of, actually.
Absolutely. By coincidence, David, my parents fostered a boy whose father was killed in Auschwitz.
Mm.
So, and he has never spoken of it as an adult. I think this was such a trauma, wasn't it, for the whole generation that was involved in it, that it's very, very difficult to put into words, very difficult.
Yeah, we didn't know. You know, we didn't go to war about concentration camps. I mean, we certainly should have done had we known, but we didn't know. I mean, the atrocity was such a scale and dimension that it was almost unimaginable how appalling it was. Irene and Helga would get letters through the Red Cross from one thing or another, from their fathers saying, "I'm all right," and so on, which of course wasn't the case.
Yes. Now, has this experience made you feel, David, that there is hope for humanity, in that the kind of generosity and kindness that your parents showed is typical of the way humans do respond with compassion? Or has the terrible circumstances of the Holocaust made you a pessimist? And I say that because you have become a modern day prophet. I mean, we all depend upon you for a message either of hope or of despair.
Well, both things are there. Both possibilities are there for human beings. And the fact that the Nazis could have happened, you can't really say it's necessarily entirely German. It's ability. It's something that's within humanity. I mean, the possibility of evil and good are in us all, and how it could have happened. The whole of the Nazi stories should never be forgotten, and because we're all human beings, and the possibilities, those possibilities are there.
Understood. Is it taking it too far to say that you have a very powerful rescue instinct in you, the campaigns that you are waging at the moment to, if I may say so, save the planet, because I believe that's what you are campaigning to do, may be traced back to watching your parents, who had such a strong social welfare instinct in their work, both with adults and children? Do you think you inherited that?
Well, I guess it's in all of us, you know. I mean, who could possibly react otherwise in the face of what we know? How could we not? And I think we all have good intentions. I think I really do. I think that in all of us, and they can be warped, and they can be suppressed. But in the end, they're the more powerful.
Well, that's a wonderful message of hope. David, I know that you have a hugely busy life and you can only give us 10 minutes, but on behalf of everyone here, thank you so much for telling us about your parents and your sisters. And thank you for that final message of hope. That's very, very good to hang on to. Thank you so much. I'd like to turn to, there's applause, muted applause from round the nation.
Thank you.
There it is. I'd like to turn to Lord Dubs, Alf Dubs, because we all have this instinct of compassion, Alf, but it can be warped. Now, you are responsible for the famous Dubs Amendment. Can you just remind people who might not know why it is particularly pertinent, particularly relevant to you?
Well, I came on a Kindertransport at the age of 6 from Prague, so I suppose my memories of fleeing, my memories of the train, and the fact that I came as a refugee, an unaccompanied child refugee, that's part of my background and part of my identity. So when I got to hear, well, I've always been involved in campaigning for refugees, but when I got to hear in 2016 that there were 95,000 unaccompanied child refugees somewhere in Europe, I felt I ought to do something to at least help them along and get some legislation passed to bring some of them to this country.
Now, you were one of Sir Nicholas Winton's children, weren't you?
I was,
so
yes.
That means you came from Prague and you arrived in Liverpool Street Station, as we've heard. Do you have memories of that train journey?
Oh, yes, I do. I can remember still in my mind's eye, my mother and a friend seeing me off at the station in Prague. It was dark, German soldiers with swastikas in the background, and off the train went. I was 6, so I was one of the youngest on the train. A long journey on hard wooden seats, but as a 6-year-old, you don't mind that. We got to the Dutch border. The older ones cheered because we were out of reach of the Nazis. I knew it was significant, but didn't know why. And then we went on to Hook of Holland, the night boat to Harwich, and then to Liverpool Street.
What happened to your parents?
Well, I was luckier than many because my father left Prague immediately when the Germans came in. My mother was refused permission to leave, but my father was there waiting for me when I got to Liverpool Street. So I was much luckier. The majority did not have a family member waiting for them. So, you know, it was a fortunate stroke for me.
Did you realize Nicholas Winton's part in your story?
Only thanks to you, only because of you, because of your program. And I knew I'd come on a Kindertransport, obviously, but I knew nothing about Nicholas Winton himself. He was a very modest man, and then suddenly the whole thing exploded. Everybody became aware of it, thanks to the initiative that you showed. I then met Nicholas Winton on a number of occasions. We became good friends, a wonderful man, a great conversationalist, and of course, he saved my life and that of many hundreds of others.
He was adamant that we shouldn't talk about the Holocaust. We should talk about Holocausts, because he said that that's not the only occasion when genocide has happened, when children have been the innocent victims, when these tragedies have occurred. And of course, I suppose you would agree with him, because that's the way you now have faced the tragedies that are happening around the world, where children are, as you said, abandoned and forced to become refugees.
Well, I think Nicky Winton was absolutely right. And I know whenever there is a Holocaust Memorial Day, we always remember the victims of other Holocausts, the victims of other genocides, the victims of other brutality. So yes, there's no point in remembering the Holocaust unless we learn a lesson from that to do our best to stop it ever happening again.
And Parliament officially recognises the importance of that, don't they? There is a plaque, I believe, up in Parliament. I haven't actually seen it. I'd love to see it.
Well, I'll take you there next time we're allowed into Parliament. Yes, there was a commemoration, a get-together about 25 years ago of Kindertransport children in London. And as part of the 2 days of events, we put up a plaque just off the central lobby in the House of Commons. And it basically says, a thank you on behalf of the 10,000 children who came on Kindertransport from Germany, Austria, and Czechoslovakia in 38-39. A thank you to the people of Britain for giving us safety. And we had a rededication ceremony about that about 3 years ago. We had the Speaker of the Commons, we had the Chief Rabbi, and we had the Archbishop of Canterbury, and they all were there to rededicate the plaque.
And I think we can see pictures of those events. Very moving. How are we doing as a nation, Alf? Are we living up to our promise of 10,000 children? Are we offering homes, offering a future and safety to the children who need it?
We could do an awful lot better. I mean, I have to say, even to this audience, that Germany showed the way with Angela Merkel when they took in 1 million Syrian refugees. And we could do much, much better. There are countries that are worse than we are, but I'm embarrassed and ashamed and angry that we aren't doing more than we could be doing. There are children sleeping rough in Calais, on the Greek islands. I visited the camp in Lesbos in Moria some time ago, and they need help. And we, along with other countries, should say, yes, we'll share responsibility and give you safety.
I don't know if you've met Ruby Reich, Alf, have you?
I think we have once, at least when I saw a picture of her, I thought we met her, yes. Forgive me, Ruby, if I'm not very good at my memory on that.
Now, Ruby, tell us where you work. It's somewhere called Safe Passage. Explain to us what that does.
Well, I'm actually a school student, so I'm in year 13.
Right.
But I started doing some charity work with Safe Passage around 4 years ago after I did my bat mitzvah. Because for part of your bat mitzvah, you have to do, we don't have to, but you are very much encouraged to do a charity project. And I donated some money to Safe Passage. And I was invited to an event that they held at the House of Lords. I think they might have assumed that I was a bit older than 14 at the time. But I went, and it was just fascinating. And they were talking about how people that may not work in a charity can help the cause that they fight for. And I was thinking, they were basically saying you can donate money and you can volunteer. But I was sitting thinking, as a 14-year-old, I can't really do either of those things. So my question was, what can the youth of today do to help, really?
And what is their work? Do they look after children who are refugees, or all refugees? Are they specific about the refugees they help?
So their aim is to provide safe and legal routes for unaccompanied minors with family in the UK to be reunited with them.
Right. Well, that sounds exactly like Alf's story, isn't it? That he was reunited with his father. So that's a good sign, Alf, isn't it? That the work continues. Even with, how old are you? One should never ask a lady's age, but between you and me, how old are you now?
I'll be 18 in 2 days, so.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
And you're continuing this work, continuing to do what you can to spread awareness. So have you any ambition in your future life, in your career, to do this professionally?
It's definitely been on my mind a lot. I think from talking to people at Safe Passage about what the youth of today can do, the main message is to spread awareness. And I think it's really important for the charities that exist and so people like the Lord Dubs, for example, or anyone really on this Zoom today, to use their platform to educate as many people as they can.
Good point. Now, I don't know if you've met your grandfather.
Oh, no.
I assume that you're very good friends. How much do you know about his story?
Well, I first learned properly about his story when I was in year 6, and I was doing a project at school on World War II. And I sat down with him and I had a little tape recorder and everything. It was very official. And I interviewed him about his life and his experiences. And then I took him to school and he talked to everyone. It was great.
Good to have a sort of grandfather who could be a sort of a mentor, but be a bit of a mascot too. Erich, well done. Thank you very much for telling Ruby, and I've no doubt inspiring her also.
I don't know how much I inspired her, but she's doing a good job.
How much do you remember of the Kindertransport and your experiences?
Well, I was very young. They tucked us out I was born in Vienna. Tucked us out when I was 3. I arrived in England,
yes,
Poland, when I was 4. A few days before the war broke out, we arrived at London docks. So I remember very little. I remember only when I arrived here in the United Kingdom.
So what family were you connecting with when you arrived in Britain?
Well, to cut a long story short, we went to Bloomsbury.
Close the door, please.
We went to Bloomsbury House.
Yes.
Ralph Vaughan Williams came along. He brought out Jewish musicians from Central Europe and took me to Dorking. Now, in Dorking, there was a refugee home. You haven't got me, you've got the next one. Hello? Oh, well, anyway, there was one couple who were refugees, the only couple that were
Can you take it out of here?
Jewish. They were Mr. and Mrs. Kryby. They were socialists. They took me in. I was their son.
And they really treated you as their child. They really loved you and looked after you as if you were their child.
I always called them Mutti und Vater, mother and dad. That's what I knew. You know, you don't remember things before you're 4 years old, particularly when you've been chucked around from one country to another.
Yeah. Well, I said at the beginning that I think that this is a celebration of parents. It's certainly a celebration of your foster parents, but also I think the courage of your own parents, because as I said before, I think to decide, because you can guess what's coming, that you want to create a future for your children, but in so doing, you will lose them yourself. That takes such courage and such self-sacrifice. What do you know about your parents?
I know absolutely nothing, but I've always appreciated what they have done. They've given me life twice, once when I was born and once when they sent me on the Kindertransport. But them, I have one picture here, and that's it, of the three of us just after my 4th birthday.
Now that has inspired a lot of the work that you've done as a philanthropist, as a fundraiser, as an inspirer of others, hasn't it? Your own experience, like Alf, you have been inspired by, if you like, the tragedy in your own past, but also the message of hope.
Well, I have, because you see, I always thank the British government for allowing us in. I know we had to come without parents. I know somebody had to vouch for us 50 quid, but they allowed us in. And that is why I am alive today. My children are alive, and also my grandchildren. And that did inspire me. I've always thought I would like to do something back. I want to give it back to this country.
You know, I work with quite a lot of adult survivors of abuse and tragedy in their childhood, and it is extraordinary how often they say exactly what you've just said to me, Erich, that they want to give back. And so my daughter listened to me telling these stories, and she said to me, saved children, save other children. And I think you and your granddaughter are a very good example of that. So thank you so much indeed for telling us your story and for the amazing work you do, both of you. And Ruby, I expect you to become famous for your pioneering work in helping the children of the future. I can see it in your eyes.
Thank you.
So can I turn now to Joe Roundell Greene? Joe, you have a story to tell, in a way, quite similar to Sir David Attenborough's, haven't you?
Yes, I have. And I suppose in many ways it's not my story, but the story of my grandparents, Clem and Vi Attlee. And they were living in Stanmore. They have 4 children. And my grandmother came back one day and said, we're going to have refugees to stay. And it is Paul who's here with us today. And this was something that we hadn't been really told of a great deal as children. And it was such a huge pleasure for me to meet Paul when we went for the anniversary of the Kindertransport. And he spoke very affectionately of my family. And I know that he was particularly fond of my mother, which for me was really very nice indeed. And they couldn't speak German or English, so they spoke Latin together, which I thought was a very nice way of communicating, because it must have been very, very difficult. But my mother mentioned this very briefly, but I think that for Paul, it was quite an important part of his life. And I know that they were all very, very fond of him. He told a lovely story how my Uncle Martin made him have a cold bath every day, which I'm very glad to say this has not continued as a family tradition, you'll be pleased to know. But I think that any kind of help that was given to these children coming over is just amazing. And I think that we can see today how we need to be doing our bit. But this particular story has really warmed my heart, and I have got some new friends. I'm delighted to say that Joe Willer and I are in contact quite often, and sadly we haven't seen each other because of the lockdown. And Paul is just the most amazing man, and I'm absolutely thrilled to have met him.
Are Paul and Joe both with us? Paul, are you with us on this virtual reunion?
Yes.
Yes.
You are. And are you with Joe?
Yes, we're both here together.
Well, that's lovely. But Paul, what memories do you have of the Attleys?
Oh, quite a few. The first day when I was there was an Easter Sunday in 1938, and it was the custom of the family to collect in the bathroom and have cold baths. I thought, this is very quaint, must be a strange English habit. And I was gestured to enter the bath, and I did. And I thought, thank goodness, it's only Easter Sunday. But I was quite wrong, because it happened every day thereafter.
It's supposed to be terribly good for you. It's supposed to perk up your immune system.
So they say.
Yes, I agree. I know nothing about it from personal experience. Has he passed it on to you, Joe, or have you escaped this tradition?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. No.
So how long were you with the Attleys, Paul?
I was there about 3 months.
Right.
They must have been glad to see the back of me when I was finally transported to Northern Ireland for the rest of the war.
Where did you stay in Northern Ireland? Was it with a family?
No, it was in a boarding school.
Right. Were you happy? Did you have looking back on your childhood, do you think it was in the end a happy story?
Oh yes, the Attleys were most accommodating, very pleasant family to be with. I remember they had a cat, and I had no experience of cats. So when I stroked it and it purred, I thought this was a danger signal. And I left.
Your life was full of adventure, what with cold baths and purring cats, Paul. But yes, quite a brusque introduction to the British way of life, but also with love and safety. And what happened to your parents?
Well, they had divorced some time before.
All
So
right.
it was only my mother that came over. And
Yeah.
in order to make ends meet, she enrolled as a nurse.
Yeah.
In Queen Charlotte's Hospital.
But she survived the war.
Yes.
Thank goodness. Joe, how much of this did you know? Has Paul told you his story?
He has.
Well,
And
yes.
we've had lots of conversations, and every time we talk, something else comes out. There's a new bits to the story. But he always seemed very positive, and I think that he had a very happy time when he was staying with the Attley family, and in spite of the cold baths. But he always said there was a lot of love, which really makes me feel extremely happy, and the rest of my family, to know that when he was staying there, that he didn't just feel he was a boy in the house, but somebody who was part of the family. And I sincerely hope that that was how he felt.
Well, that's lovely to hear. Now, there is a mystery for me in all this, because having researched Sir Nicholas Winton's story, I do know that when he was looking for safe refuges for the children who otherwise he realized would have ended up victims of the Holocaust, he, I think, was turned down by America. I think 6 of his children went to Sweden, and only Britain opened their arms. Now, admittedly, there were conditions. They had to have sponsoring families, and there was a certain amount of money they had to raise, but at least they were granted visas. Now, I'm wondering whether Marigold Bentley is going to help me to understand why it was that Britain opened their arms to these children when other countries did not. Marigold, do you know?
Well,
I
I think it was partly to do with the operation of the British Quakers, who were very instrumental in a huge feeding scheme right across Germany in the 19s and 20s. And because Quakers were very politically engaged throughout that period also, that there was an enormous amount of pressure brought to bear on the British Parliament to take in refugees, and of course to follow the course of events across Europe, so that they knew there was a point at which they reached when things were so desperate that people said, we have to save these children.
There was an MP, Philip Noel Baker. Can you tell us a bit about him?
Well, he was very much in touch with Bertha Bracey. And so Bertha Bracey was a Quaker worker. I think we have a picture of her somewhere. She was particularly active across Europe, and of course a well-known, doughty and formidable Quaker woman. She spoke fluent German, and she was appointed part of the Quaker Germany Emergency Committee in 1933. And through that work, engaging right across Europe, but particularly Germany, she was constantly engaging with the politicians in Britain as well as the politicians in Germany. And in 1938, as we know, she very carefully negotiated the particular deal, in a way, that they arranged for the temporary visas for children without parents, and a £50 bond for each one. So it was through really her tenacity, influencing, and of course the groundswell from Quakers across Britain who were also pressing their MPs. So a combination of that kind of very powerful moral compass, personal agency, powerful networking, that all those came together and said, this is what we have to do.
And of course, there was Jewish advocacy as well, because the Jews in this country, although I don't think many of them could possibly have understood what was happening in concentration camps, or was going to happen in concentration camps, they absolutely understood the threat. And but it really fascinates me that the Quakers, were they under threat in Germany? As far as I know, I've never read of persecution of Quakers in Germany. So it wasn't that they were suffering as victims, it was this tremendous humanitarian urge that infuses the Quaker movement.
Quakers were very, very unhappy about the settlement at the end of World War I. They felt that it sowed the seed for a future war and punished people in a way that was not helpful. So an enormous feeding and relief effort was put into place. And we do need to remind ourselves, 1938 was only 20 years since the end of World War I, and people were very, very fearful of another war. And there was a lot of desperation and fear. And it was really important to remind everyone really of acts of bravery and kindness that then had to come into play.
And indeed, if anyone wants to read an eloquent parliamentary speech, the speech by Philip Noel Baker in Parliament about the desperate need for people to show generosity and compassion to children at this time, it's so eloquent and so moving and so inspiring. Now, I hate to bring my family into this again, but my Aunt Jane drove an ambulance for the Quaker Relief. She mystified them a bit because she was obviously Jewish, and when she went to see them and say she wanted to work with them, they said, "You're not a Quaker," and she said, "I know I'm not a Quaker, but make up your minds, will you have me or will you not?" And they did. And she was actually in the first civilian party that opened up Belsen. And she never forgot what she saw. She was interviewed by Steven Spielberg in his Shoah archive. She was my godmother, and she never talked to me about it. Never. I knew she'd done it, but I never knew the detail until I read the report she wrote for the Jewish Chronicle. And it interests me that it was the Quakers that used her skill and her energy and her youth to help in Germany after the war. So that's a link for me, a personal link for me. So it's wonderful to know about this. It's, again, a lesson of hope. I don't know whether Alf is still with us. Lord Dubs, are you still with us? Because I wondered whether I see you.
Yes, I am.
Can you tell me, it was partly the Quakers' advocacy, partly the Jews' advocacy, but it still seems to me something of a miracle that we let in these children at a time when so few countries did.
Yes, it was a miracle, especially as Britain was pretty well the only country that would take them. The rest of Europe said no. Even the Americans said it's extra to their quota, they can't do it. So yes, on the other hand, I've read the debates in Parliament in the autumn of 1938 when they were debating whether to allow us Kindertransport children into the country, and there were some strong voices against. But in the end, people like Philip Noel Baker, they won the day. And the government decided, yes, it was an act of tremendous generosity by this country. And as was said before, I shall be eternally grateful to Britain for what it's done in saving my life and that of many others.
Now, obviously, there were parents who couldn't bear the agony of giving up their children. And I remember seeing the Czech film of the Kindertransport that you were in, Alf, where there was one father and mother who saw their 6-year-old daughter getting on the train and couldn't bear it and took her back off the train with terrible results. So I do think that we need a special vote of thanks to these visionary parents who are prepared to make this sacrifice.
Yeah. Well, I would agree. I remember seeing that, and it was a very, very painful bit of filming, that to see the father who couldn't bear to let his daughter disappear on a train to heaven knows where. So yes, very, very painful memories indeed, and very brave parents who allowed their children to go.
Times change. Things are very different now. I remember Nicky Winton put advertisements showing the pictures of children in picture posts and in other newspapers in order to advertise for families in a way that would never be allowed now. Do we still have foster parents looking after refugee children, or is it now much more official with social services and so on? Do we have families opening their arms in the same way?
Yes, we do. Look, we have two sorts of children: those that have family here who come to join their uncles, aunts, or parents, or whatever it is, and then there are the children who were the subject of my first amendment in Parliament that you referred to, and they are children who don't have any family here. And the usual procedure is that we have foster parents. The local authority arranges for foster parents to take the children with some help from social workers. And that is the model for, if they're 17, and then they will be in supported accommodation. But for most of them, it's a matter of having qualified foster parents to look after children who come and provide them with a family and love and affection.
Yes, well, one of the other things that strikes me whenever I meet the survivors of Kindertransport is what outstanding individuals they are, and whether it is that they inherit the courage of their parents, or whether it is that the experiences they've been through have sharpened their ambition to help others. I can't say. What is your view?
Oh, I don't know. Look, we are the sort of people we are, and we do what we feel we're obliged to do. And it's fairly obvious in my case that that became one of my many, or my most important political commitment. But you know, there are a lot of people who came and who contributed in smaller ways, maybe not in public life, but who contributed in smaller ways and helped this country. So at whatever level the Kindertransport children came to live and operate, at that level, most of them have made a very big contribution to well-being in our country.
So would you say, or is it hopelessly idealistic to say this, that to open your country to refugee children is in itself an investment?
Yes, I think it is. It's an investment in having for our future children who are going to contribute, children who will be passionate about doing what they can to be part of our local communities and then to contribute to our society. But it's also an investment in terms of our own sense of what is important in life. And I think, I don't mean we should pat ourselves on the back and say we're wonderful, but I think it's an investment to say, these are the signs of a decent country, a country that will take children, vulnerable children, into our families, into our society. And it's a sign of a decent society that does that. And it's a sign of a miserable society that doesn't like doing it.
And if you could say anything to that 6-year-old you, or you were younger, weren't you?
No, I was 6. I was 6.
Oh, you were 6.
Eric keeps reminding me how much he's about 2 or 3 years younger than I am. Eric keeps reminding me I'm much older than he is.
Right. Well, what would you say to that 6-year-old who is standing there with a label around his neck and a tiny suitcase in his hand, and that was all?
Well, I would say something it took me a long time to live up to. I would say, believe in yourself. Don't feel doors are closed to you in this country. Push at the doors and do what you feel is the right thing to do. But above all, believe in yourselves and believe in your future.
Terrific. Well, what a wonderful hour we have spent together, and how much wisdom and how much information we've gleaned from these remarkable people who have remarkable parents and grandparents, and who owe a lot of their good fortune to other terrific families across the UK who did the right thing by these children, invested in these children, and we're all benefiting from it. So thank you all so much for a wonderful hour that I've been able to spend with you. And I will now hand back to Erich, who is slightly younger than Alf, but I'm sure will be able to live up to the examples in front of him.
Am I unmuted?
Yes.
Good. Before I thank everybody, including you, Esther, I would like to remind people that on our 70th anniversary coming here, we had at the Jewish Free School, we invited Prince Charles. He came, he didn't give much of a speech, but at the very end, what he said will always remain with me. And he said, I'm pleased that the government of the time allowed you in because you have given so much back to this country. And that is why I believe, as Lord Dubs has said, that we should bring in unaccompanied children. We give them our environment, we give them our education, and they give us back what we don't have, or we don't have enough of. So I would like to thank everybody, all the guests, all the speakers, for coming today. But most of all, I would like to thank the AJR, Michael, Susan, Deborah, and Alex, for all the work that has been behind the scenes. I only wrote a letter. That's easy. But I did get an answer. And that was the difficult part. I don't think David is around anymore, so I can't thank him. I'll do that separately. Thank you very, very much. To you, Michael.
Thank you, Eric. And just before everybody zooms off, we did have a couple of photographs that we wanted to show during the event. We're just going to show now, and it gives me an opportunity just to, here we are. So these are the registration cards for the two Beyer sisters who stayed with Sir David's family. These were cards that were kept in the archive of the Jewish Refugees Committee, now World Jewish Relief. And if anybody's interested in contacting them to see whether they have records pertaining to your family, you can go to the WJR website and click through the links there. And we also have a couple of photographs of the two sisters. Here they are. And the next one is one of the sisters with Sir David's mother. And then this is the plaque that Dame Esther was referring to earlier, or Lord Dubs was referring to, in Central Lobby, that's been dedicated and rededicated a couple of times. And this was the last iteration a couple of years ago. And there you see the reunion picture of Jo Roundell Greene and her cousin, Lord Attlee, with Paul, and of course the Speaker of the House of the Commons, John Bercow. And there we all are in Central Lobby. So thank you all, Dame Esther, Lord Dubs, Sir Erich Reich. Eric, I think you trumped all these great titles by invoking Prince Charles at the end. But thank you all, and Marigold, and Joe Willer, and Paul Willer, and Jo Roundell Greene. Thank you all so much for making this a very, very special event. We're delighted to have welcomed, I think it was almost 700 people to this event, probably more because there were more people watching per screen. And please do contact us if you know of anybody that can benefit from our services, or if you would like to join, you're really most welcome. And take care, and we'll see you all very soon at the next big AJR event. Thank you all to everybody.
Thank you.